Hello, everyone. This is a Fantasy Fellowship author talk. My name is Chris.
And I'm Max. Welcome to Fantasy Fellowship YouTube. And with us today, we have the creator of our favourite Northumbrian, Uhtred of Babenberg, and an officer of the Order of the British Empire, Bernard Cornwell. His works have spanned important historical events such as Napoleonic Wars, the reign of Alfred the Great, and the American Civil War, as well as giving us a delightfully unique view of Arthurian Britain. With 2 TV shows of his works under his belt and a third on the way, I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say thank you, America, for denying this man a green card and making him pick up writing. He has been president of the Historical Writers Association and a recipient of their Lifetime Achievement Award, and it's our great pleasure to welcome him.
Over in our Fantasy Fellowship Discord, we have a large community of book lovers who enjoy a diverse array of reading. We have so many historical fiction fans that we have a dedicated channel just for these discussions. It is in this channel that today's guest, Bernard Cornwell, absolutely dominates. As well as his other works such as Sharp and the Warrior Chronicles, it's Bernard's Warlord trilogy that is absolutely adored by our community. With a recent resurgence, we've seen more and more people picking up The Winter King and being sucked into this brilliant Arthurian retelling. We were treated to Bernard's latest book, Sharp's Assassin, last year. The first Sharp tale for, I believe, is 11 years. You're now back at it with Sharp's Command, due to be published next year. What inspired you to revisit the Sharp series after such a long break?
I couldn't think what else to write, to be honest. And I've missed them. I like Sharp.
Yeah, I'm sure it feels like a comfy pair of trainers.
So speaking of Sharp, the first book, Sharp's Eagle, it all came about due to kind of, a bit of a chance meeting at a party, if I believe correctly.
Well, no, it really came about because I met an American woman and decided to marry her. And she couldn't live in Britain for family reasons, but I was free to leave Britain. But I couldn't get a work permit in America. And I held a perfectly respectable job with the BBC, but it looked as if I was going to be unemployed in America. And then I thought, well, I don't need anybody's permission to write a book, so I wrote Sharp's Eagle. And it sounds a little bit too easy, but that's exactly what happened.
You're on record that the C.S. Forester Hornblower novels were your inspiration for writing Sharp. Why did you move the story to an infantry standpoint, and what other books have you taken inspiration from over the years?
Oh Lord. Well, I'd always wanted to write novels. I mean, I'll be honest. So I think the difficult thing is knowing what to write about. And then it occurred to me that C.S. Forester had made a very good living writing about the Navy, and then there was Patrick O'Brian yet to start, but he would eventually, and there was Douglas Riemann and Alexander Pope. There was all these guys seemed to be making a huge amount of success out of the Navy against Napoleon, and I thought, why has nobody done it for the Army? So that was really the inspiration and the idea of it, was to do a hornblower on land.
Were armed forces something that you've always been interested in before you were writing?
Yeah, I was interested in them, and I was fascinated by the Napoleonic Wars and had been reading about the Napoleonic Wars since about the age of 12 or 13. So in a sense, I'd already done a lot of the research that was needed for the Sharp series.
Perfect.
And in that respect, had you done like a lot of the research for the Waterloo book as well?
Well, that was something of a nightmare. It's the only non-fiction book I've written. And the problem with non-fiction is you have to get it right. You can't just make things up as you go along. And I realized, I think when the time I finished, I'd moved an enormous table into this office here. It had over 170 books on the table, most of them open with post-it notes.
Wow.
So yes, there was a vast amount. I mean, I thought I knew the battle pretty well. I'd already written Sharp's Waterloo. But once you actually start to actually have to write about the battle itself, I realized that how much I didn't know.
Yeah.
You're lucky though. There is like quite a wealth of knowledge like from that time in terms of like diaries from the soldiers and things. So
yeah, luckily there's so many diaries and letters, and I mean whole collections of documents have been published, and I have all those. It was an immense amount of research, but actually I must admit I enjoyed writing it, and partly because the story is so compelling. And that, I think, was the easiest thing about writing the book, was that I didn't have to invent a plot. I always reckon 95% of the work of a novel is inventing the plot or the story. Waterloo presents you with a ready-made story with an incredibly dramatic ending. So that was, I enjoyed that a lot.
Would you consider writing any more non-fiction?
No, it's too much like hard work.
Fair enough.
So going back to the fan favorites of Warlord Chronicle, or the Warlord Chronicles, the character of Lancelot de Lac, like you've changed it quite a bit from the idyllic knight who is the embodiment of all things noble and great to this weasel of a man.
I enjoyed doing that.
Yeah, what prompted that?
I never particularly liked it. And I mean, essentially, he was a latecomer to the stories. I don't know whether Chrétien de Troyes invented him or not, but I've always thought it took a Frenchman to put adultery into a good British story. I thought there's no reason why this bloody man should be a hero.
There's almost an element of being too good to be true.
And remember, I am writing
Le Morte d'Arthur is like 14th century or so. It's quite a bit after.
More on the Warlord trilogy. So one of our members who submitted a question, it's quite an important question, is why let Samson live? It's quite a controversial decision among the readers.
Yeah, well, I wanted Samson to witness the success of those he hated.
Yeah.
And he's a horrible little man, I agree, but in the end he's lost, and the best revenge is living well.
Yeah, he's very robust.
Which is your favorite then out of the Arthurian legends, or the favorite like retelling?
I think I'd have to say the Winter King, because the other two would never have been written without it. Although I don't think it's the best of the three. If I had my life over again, I'd rewrite the first third. But it was a wonderful book to write. I remember thinking that I needed to give myself extra time to do the research, and I researched assiduously for about 6 months. And I remember the day in September, I just thought, this is boring. I want to be writing. And I'd already made a decision that I'd do it in the first person, which I'd never done before. So I thought, well, why don't you just write one chapter in the first person and see if it's easy or see if it works. And I wrote that one chapter, and 2 days before Christmas, it was finished, the whole book. It more or less wrote itself, and so did the other two. They came, I won't say they came easily, but it was enormous fun writing them, simply because there wasn't a whole heck of a lot of rewriting to repair the plot, which is usually the biggest problem. So I think I'd just go with The Winter King. It's being filmed for television right now as we speak.
Oh, we know. We're very excited. We've got questions on that coming up, I think. Yeah, everyone's very excited. There's been a lot of talk about it in the Discord. Yeah, we got things popping up on Facebook and the likes, and there's been a lot of chatter since that got posted. Everyone's very excited for it. Was Derval always going to be your protagonist, or did you ever consider telling Arthur's story from a different point of view? Or
no, I didn't want to write it from Arthur's point of view. I wanted it to be somebody who was watching him. And the other thing I wanted was to try as far as possible to only use characters who are mentioned in the oldest versions of his stories. There was this character called Derval Cadan, who really vanished from the stories. By the time we get to Mallory's retelling, there's no Derval. There's a whole lot of new knights, but Derval is gone. And I thought, well, that's nice. Let's use him. And there's no doubt he existed. I mean, there's a place in Wales called Llanderval, where it's said that he built the church there. So he was, if you like, he was just a convenient bystander who would have seen everything and could therefore tell the story.
you definitely wrote a very lovable character. He's a very
Yes.
perhaps not a reliable narrator. You know, he's got rose-tinted glasses on the people around him, but he's a brilliant narrator to read. He's very easy to read, and he's a very comfortable read as well. I think he's somebody that everybody can relate to and want to be like if they were living that kind of life.
If they were unfortunate enough, yes.
Yeah. If you're going to be like anybody.
Have you listened to the thinking of Arthurian? Have you listened to the Tom Holland's Rest is History on the Arthurian legends?
Sorry, have I listened to what?
The Rest is History, Tom Holland's
No, I haven't.
podcast.
It's
They have a very good episode.
I'll put it on the list.
Yeah, definitely. There's a
Whether they
podcast
think
called The
it's
Rest
real
is
or not.
History. So yeah, it's Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook. And yeah, they talk on all aspects of history from World War II, Arthurian legends, Rome, the Middle East, everywhere, all eras, and 99% of the episodes are very compelling. They're really good, well researched, and they're both great speakers as well.
Yeah. But moving back to you,
back to the questions.
So let's move on to the Saxon stories a bit. Now that you've finished the whole Saxon series, do you feel it's done, or like with Sharp, will it be revisited and maybe a novella? Or
I can't tell you because I never know what I'm going to do next, sort of thing. I mean, I have an idea for the next book, but beyond that, I don't know. I guess there are gaps in Uhtred's story, so I could go back, and if I'm feeling an absolute lack of inspiration to write anything else, that's a possibility. I mean, I've done it to Sharp, as you say, so I suppose it could happen to Uhtred, yeah.
The story of Uhtred is the story of England. When do you feel England came to be? Athelstan, Edmund, they all fought for the north, and it changed hands over the years. Is there a specific point in time that
I'll go
the
with the
country
Battle of Brunanburg.
stopped warring and became one country?
Well, I'd still go with the Battle of Brunanburg, even though there's more fighting to come.
Okay.
I think you could call that the birthday to England. Unfortunately, we don't know the exact date, but that's what I'll stick with.
any particular reason, or?
Well, I think it's before that battle. There's no doubt that the Athelstan could call himself King of Wessex, East Anglia and Mercia, but there's no way he could claim the north. After that battle, he could and did. And his strongest enemies, the Irish Vikings and the Scots, had been totally defeated. So, yes, I think it's at that moment that Alfred's dream of united England comes true.
Where did this interest in Anglo-Saxon history then stem from?
I'd always been interested ever since I'd learned Anglo-Saxon at college, which I can't say I thoroughly enjoyed, but I rather liked the poems that I read, like The Wanderer and The Seafarer, The Dream of the Rood and The Battle of Malvern. And so there was always in my mind the thought that I might one day go back and write about the Anglo-Saxons. But you have to think that almost all historical novels, not all of them, but most of them, have two stories. There's a big story and a little story. The big story in Gone with the Wind is the Civil War. The little story is Can Scarlet Save Tara? And what you do is you flip them. You put the little story in front and the big story behind. And at some point I realized that I had no idea how England came to be. I mean, I think I had a reasonably good education in Britain, in England specifically, yet I was never really taught that. And I wanted to tell that story, but I didn't have a little story. I had a big story, which is the creation of a whole country, but no little story. Then, in my 50s, I met my real father for the very first time. He was a lovely man. He was living in British Columbia. And he said, you should see your family tree. He showed me the family tree, which went all the way back to Odin, the god. And in there was these characters called Uhtred, and they'd been lords of Bebbanburg. And somehow that held on to Bebbanburg even through the Viking occupation of Northumbria. And I thought, that's my little story.
It's quite the story as well.
I thought, that's it. I've got the big story. I just need to tell the story of one guy who was there, and I'll take my ancestor.
We did get a few comments saying that the Cornwalls had been cheated out of their castle in Bevenberg in recent history.
It wasn't the Cornwalls, it was the Outricks. I took my mother's name.
Really?
But yes, they were cheated out in 1016. It was a horrible plot by King Canute in league with Earl Godwin. And the then Lord of Bevenberg was enticed to a feast somewhere, I think in York, I'm not sure where. And they had assassins hit all around the hall, and they were all slaughtered.
Wow.
So we lost Bevenberg. It wouldn't be mine anyway. There are far more senior members of the family, more direct line than me.
Echoes of the Red Wedding.
And anyway, I was born on the wrong side of the blanket, as they say. So, but it would be nice to have a relative in the castle.
Yeah.
It is a magnificent place.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. So both Sharp and Uhtred have gained new fans through the TV adaptations. Both these TV adaptations have come through whilst you were still writing those tales. How have the performances of those actors such as Sean Bean, Darragh O'Malley and Alexander Drayman influenced you in writing those books that came after? And how much of an input did you have in the show's production and how they were put together?
The only input I had was writing the books.
Quite a lot.
Beyond that, I deliberately take a step back. I mean, both productions were kind enough to ask me if I wanted to be a technical advisor, and I turned it down.
Yeah.
I worked in television for 10 or 11 years, but it was all in news and current affairs. And the one thing I realized was that I know nothing whatever about producing television dramas, so any involvement by me would probably be counterproductive. So no influence from me. But yes, I was especially affected by Sean Bean's depiction of Sharp, which I thought was absolutely brilliant and wonderful. And from the first moment I heard Sean playing Sharp, I heard his voice in my head.
Yeah.
And even now, writing another Sharp book, I hear Sean Bean talking to me, or talking. And that, I think Sean was absolutely wonderful. And Pete Postlethwaite playing Obadiah Hakeswill. When I sat and watched his performances and thought his Hakeswill is far better than mine. And I did write a couple of books with Hakeswill after that, and that was definitely influenced by Pete Postlethwaite, and why not?
Yeah, because Sean Bean doesn't quite fit the image of Sharp painted in the first few books.
No, he doesn't. His hair is the wrong colour, and I mean, I never had very much sympathy for people who complained about that. I thought, well, you're getting a brilliant Sharp anyway, so what, he had his hair dyed. I just took a fair amount of trouble after Sean had started playing Sharp not to mention his hair colour again. But Sean, he couldn't have been done better. I mean, Sean was unutterably brilliant at it.
Yeah,
all
definitely
of the Sharp is fantastic. But speaking of the TV shows, so Warlord Chronicles is coming out sometime in the future. Are there any details that are allowed to be shared about it, or
about the Winter King?
Yes.
I have no idea. I assume the first series will come next year, but that's an assumption. I don't know. I do hear that the filming is going well. They're working in the West Country in South Wales, so they're in the right place.
Yeah.
I listened to a read through by the actors for the first 4 episodes and was awestruck. They were wonderful. So I will know as soon as you know, I guess.
Yeah.
And I'll watch it like you do.
It's definitely highly anticipated. It's going to be one for the calendar next year or the year after, depending on how it plays out.
I think late next year looks possible. But...
Okay. So, amongst all your publications, you have only published one non-fiction work, as we've spoken about before, Waterloo, The History of 4 Days, 3 Armies and 3 Battles. When writing your novels, how important is it to you that you try to tell the stories of the people that lived and died through those periods?
What's important to me is that it's authentic.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be truthful. In fact, I play merry hell with history, and the obvious example of that is Sharp's Company, where Sharp goes through the breach. I think it's the Santa Maria breach or the Trinidad, I can't remember now. And the truth is nobody got through a breach. The slaughter of that night was in the breaches. It was an absolute horror night. The successful assault was meant to be a feint, which was on the castle, and that succeeded. But I thought, well, the drama of the night's going to be in those breaches, and if Sharp is going into a breach, Sharp gets through. So I change history to suit my story, but I do confess my sin in the historical note at the end of the book. I mean, obviously you can't change the result of the Battle of Waterloo unless you're French, and they usually do. But, you know, I am writing fiction. So at Badajoz, Sharp can get through the breach. And we don't know who shot the Prince of Orange at Waterloo, but it's an obvious thing that Sharp would want to do. So, you know, I give him the rifle and let him shoot Bugger. Similarly in Sharp's Tiger, when the Tipu Sultan died at Seringapatam, it was probably a private from a Kentish regiment who killed him. But nobody ever found out, and the reason that soldier almost certainly never volunteered the information that he had killed the enemy's leader was because he'd stolen so many jewels off the corpse and didn't want to give them up. So I thought, okay, there's another little dark corner of history we don't know the answer to, but Sharp will be there, so he can do it. So it's not very important to get the actual history right. It's important to make the background authentic. But the most important thing of all is the story. Get the story right.
Yeah, bit of artistic liberty.
Yeah,
definitely.
So a lot of your stories.
It is historical fiction.
Yeah, it's
but if you want to
definitely.
know about the Peninsular Wars, you go and buy Charles Esdale's brilliant book, you know, History of the Peninsular War. And this is not, I'm not denigrating Esdale's book at all, but it probably won't keep you awake at night. I like to think that if you're reading a Sharp book, you get to the end of chapter 4 and you have to read chapter 5, so you know you're late for work the next morning. That's my success. But my job is to entertain. His is to inform. And he does it brilliantly.
That's the magic of historical fiction, isn't it? It's that gateway. You might read a book on Waterloo, for example, Anglo-Saxons, whatever it may be, Vikings, and it kind of ignites that love for the era, the people, the setting, and then you go and pursue history off the back of that, and that's where obviously the education compounds and grows. And I think it's a really important segue that allows people to go exploring things that they probably wouldn't have stumbled across originally.
Well, that's not exactly what happened to me with Hornblower. I mean, I read the Hornblower books when I was 12, 13, 14, and then suddenly there were no more after the last one, which I think was Hornblower and the Atropos. And I wanted more, so I went to the library and I got out books on the Napoleonic Wars. And through those books, I discovered the Duke of Wellington and the Peninsular Campaign. So in many ways, the Sharp books are a direct descendant of Hornblower, simply because he got me fascinated in that period.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
So all these like generals, Duke of Wellington, you write about like Alfred the Great, all the great leaders like this. If you could pick leaders from throughout history to speak to yourself, just have a sit down with, who would you choose?
That's a very good question. I usually say the Duke of Wellington, but the truth is he wouldn't like me at all. He detested authors. He had no small talk. If I took my wife along, he'd be fine, because we always unbent a bit with beautiful women nearby. All the best Duke stories come from women. He told it to them. But he was notoriously cold and short-tempered with people like me, so it would be a very uncomfortable meeting. I think if I had to select, there's two I'd select. I'd love to meet Nell Gwyn, because you get all the gossip of the Restoration period, and it would be priceless. And Elizabeth I would be rather fun to sit down and talk to as well.
Yeah.
So I'll choose
Definitely.
women. They're better conversationalists anyway.
Yeah, tell better stories too. So a trademark of your writing is your ability to put the reader right in the front line of the battle. You can place the reader directly in that shield wall. If you found yourself on a battlefield, one side armed with brown bess muskets and the other with the English longbow, which side would win?
Oh, the longbow. And the soldiers in the Peninsular War knew that already. The Duke of Wellington actually wrote to the War Office saying, was there any chance of raising a battalion of longbowmen? And they said no, there was not enough men trained to the bow to do it. But the longbow obviously has a far higher rate of fire than the musket. It's more accurate. No, I mean, 1,000 longbowmen would have gone through 5,000 musketeers in no time at all. It would be a slaughter. I think it was Ben Franklin who said that if only the American rebels had had the longbow instead of the flintlock musket, the revolution would have been over in a year. I mean, it's very odd that the longbow was a quite brilliantly wonderful weapon, but its problem was it took years to train a man to use it.
Yeah.
We've got a few questions about like between the different characters. So who would win in a duel between Derfel and Uhtred?
Oh Lord, I have no idea. Whichever one you prefer most, you can give the victory to.
That's a hard question as well.
They beat each other to a paste, so no idea, none at all. I know who'd win one between Uhtred and Sharp, and Derfel and Sharp. Sharp would, because he doesn't fight fair, he'd just shoot the bugger.
Very
Is
Raiders of the Lost Ark-esque.
Yeah. Is there any other historical period that you'd like to write on that you've yet to explore?
There's a couple, but what they are, it's so vague in my head that I don't know if I'm ever going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting very old and ancient. I don't know how many more books I've got in me. At least one more Sharp. And I would like to go back to Ryder Sandman from the Gallows Thief. I actually very much in the mind to revisit stuff I've done before. I mean, a lot of people like the Thomas of Hookton books, Harlequin and Vagabond. And I'd quite like to meet him again too, because I quite enjoyed him. So I don't know. I've always liked the Tudor period, but I've only done one book in that period, and I don't think I'll go back there. It's not a very good answer. It's the only one you're going to get.
So speaking of all these, like you like the Tudor period, Napoleonic Wars, is there any particular event in history you would really like to be a fly on the wall for?
A fly on the wall for? Oh, it would have to be Waterloo. Because much as we know about it, there's so much we don't know about it. I mean, one of the things that amazed me is that the attack of the Imperial Guard at the end of the battle is probably one of the most famous passages of arms in all history. But there's no agreement whether the Guard advanced in square or in column. So yes, if I can find a nice, safe place to watch it, I'll choose Waterloo.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, what was the last truly great book that you read?
The last truly great book I read is a trilogy by a wonderful man called Ian Toll, Toll, and I think the first book is called Pacific Crucible, and it tells the story of the Americans' war in the South Pacific in the Second World War. And that trilogy, I think, is the best history I've read in 10 years or longer. It's a quite stunning 3 books.
I imagine that's going to get added to a lot of people's to-be-read pile. No.
It really is quite wonderful, not only on the whole strategy, but right down to a very local level what was going on and what it was like to be in that war. And I love really good history, and I must admit Ian Toll's trilogy is superb, utterly superb.
Brilliant. I'll definitely be checking that one out.
Same, yeah.
Without a shadow of a doubt.
So out of all the characters that you've written on, who is your favorite?
Oh, I'm afraid it has to be Sharp. Not only because that's what I'm writing now. His voice is more accessible to me. Is much more recent. And Sharp has been very good to us. And I enjoy his company. I mean, he's a grumpy old sod. He really is. He's not always the pleasantest. Certainly not first thing in the morning. But one of the nice things about writing fiction is that you hear your characters talking in your head. I mean, I'm taking the dog for a walk or whatever, and I hear them having conversations, not with me, but with each other. And I always enjoy Sharp's conversations, grumpy sod though he is. But I think it has to be Sharp.
Do these then find their way into the books, or is it just kind of...
Oh, yes, a lot of that ends up in the books, yes. I'll hear them say something, and I think, oh, well, that's got to go.
So, building off that, can you give us an insight into your writing plan? Especially your longer series. Your series spans such a large period of history. Do you have an overarching story you want to tell with a set start and an end point? For example, did you plan for Sharp or Uhtred to have such a long series when you started?
I knew with Uhtred that it would end at the Battle of Brunanburg. It had to, that was, if you like, the climax. With the Winter King, I don't even remember Excalibur now. But obviously the last scene where Arthur is taken away and no one has seen him since, that was the end point. With Sharp, it was always meant to be Waterloo. But I hate to tell you, I have no plan whatsoever. I can't plan a book, let alone a series. I start a book by shoving the hero, or if there's a heroine, into a situation which is pretty nasty to see how they get out of it. And it just goes on from there. And it's an incredibly inefficient way to write a book, but it's the only way I know. I've never been able to plot a book out, and I envy those writers who can. It must be wonderful to get up on a Monday morning, find a piece of paper which says, this is what happens in chapter 4. I mean, I've literally got to the end of a book with only one chapter to go and not known how it was going to end. But knowing it has to end because it's long enough already. And it really isn't a very good way to write, but it works.
I think
clearly it works.
Yeah, I think it definitely contributes to the twists and turns that you get when you read. You know, you never know how your novels are going to play out, which is probably a factor of that writing style. Like I personally, I finished Excalibur today, so I'm speaking from fresh experience there.
So
you look as if you survived it, so well done.
Yeah, just about.
So you've done quite a bit of sailing, and have sailed across the Atlantic. Have you had any adventures with that before that have influenced your writing?
Yeah, I don't think I'll ever go back to the sailing books. I mean, I still sail a lot. And they were fun to write, but it was really an experiment to see what happens if you write a contemporary novel. And after writing 4 or 5 of them, I thought, well, I'm not enjoying this nearly as much as I do writing historical novels. So I went back to the historical novels. And there was also the thought that there were not, back then anyway, when I wrote those, not many novels set against a sailing background. And sailing was a particular passion of mine, and still is. I thought, well, let's set them in that milieu. They were fun to write, but not my favourites.
I enjoyed reading them.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Well, my labour wasn't in vain.
You've often been described as a master of your craft. So we've touched on how you got into writing. Do you have any words of advice for our writing members in our community?
Keep going.
Fair.
And remember Somerset Maugham's advice. There are 3 rules for writing a novel. Unfortunately, no one knows what they are. And you have to make up your own rules as you go along. I mean, I think we all begin by knowing roughly what we want to write. I mean, I heard somebody once say that writing well is difficult. Writing itself is not difficult. The most difficult thing of all is knowing what to write about. But on the whole, you're going to write what you want to read and hope that an agent or a publisher likes what you like and that they in turn can pass it on to a public that also likes it. But there really is no alternative except to park your ass on a chair every morning and work. And my admiration always goes to those wonderful women who are mothers and housewives who still manage to turn out brilliant novels, because I don't know how the hell they did it. I mean, I'm very, very lucky. I have a great spouse. So my time can be spent here at this desk typing away. And that's it. You just sit every day and do it.
Good advice.
Yeah. Have there been any periods in history that haven't made it into the books during researching?
No, not that I can remember. If I actually start to research, then something's going to spark me. So I don't think so.
So how do you decide where to draw the line between historical fact and fiction? We've touched on it before for the artistic liberty. Is it important to you that you provide that introduction for your novels to readers with that line?
Well, no, I mean, the important thing is the story.
Yeah.
I mean, I tell people constantly, I'm not an historian, I'm a storyteller. That's my job. That's what I get paid to do, to tell stories. And if you have to change history to make that story better, change it, but just confess your sin in a note at the end of the book.
Yeah.
I mean, I sometimes think I play merry hell with history, but I'm probably more careful than many. But no, history is not sacred to a novelist. It's there and it's useful and it supplies endless stories, but in the end, your story is the most important one.
Yeah.
Are there any, apart from Toll and The Hornblower, have there been any recommended historical fiction that you tell people to read?
Well, I tell them to read Hornblower. And the great Hilary Mantel, who sadly died recently. Undoubtedly the best historical novel I've read recently, and maybe ever, is Hamlet by Maggie O'Farrell. And that is utterly brilliant and astonishing book, utterly astonishing. I think I'm right in saying it's Maggie's first book. So we have a hell of a lot to look forward to. I know her second book has just come out, and I have it, but I haven't yet started it.
You just touched previously on strong women finding time to write around their hectic schedules. Will Susanna Kells ever make a comeback?
No, she's retired.
That's a shame. Fair enough.
That's a shame. And a final thing, Simon Scarrow made a lovely nod to a major in the 95th in his Wellington and Napoleon Quartet series. Is there any particular competition out there for you feel?
Is there any what?
Is there any particular competition out there for you?
Well, sure there is. I mean, there's a lot of people doing books that are not dissimilar to mine. And they're all, if you like, competition. Although, as one famous writer once said, your competition is the reader.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's not a question of you can buy this or that, because you probably buy both.
Yeah.
it's keeping the reader wanting to buy your books.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That's all the questions we have for you. So just to round it out, we'd like to say big thank you for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. No problem. If you want to know more about Bernard and his work, you can check his website, which is www.bernardcornwell.net. Find his books at any bookshop or charity shop. Please try and shop local and support your indie bookstores. To watch screen adaptations, you can find The Last Kingdom on Netflix, Sharp on BritBox or Amazon Prime. If you've enjoyed this talk, you can find out more about the Fantasy Fellowship on our website, which is fantasy-fellowship.co.uk, or you can follow us on Twitter, where we are at Fan Fellowship, or Instagram, where we're at fantasy_fellowship. If you want to chat books, TV shows, and all things fantasy, you can join our Discord server via links in any of these previously mentioned pages. You can find more content on the Fantasy Fellowship YouTube channel, including author Q&As, fandom discussion groups, and monthly Fantasy Fellowship buddy reads. Thank you very much for joining us, and thanks again, Bernard.
Thank you, Max, and thank you, Christopher. It was a pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.